Well, I hope you've enjoyed and benefited from all the videos that our family ministry team has put together to help you foster spiritual practices in your home. And this last video, I'd like to help you put that all together and develop what we call a rule of life for your family. Now, just like that word discipline we talked about in our very first video that can elicit this feeling of burden, that word rule might get under your skin as well. But essentially, when we talk about a rule of life, it is just a way of making a plan to help the important things in your life really be important. One parenting tip I got years ago was you need to make important things urgent, that they don't just happen and you need to work them in to the rhythms of your family life. And developing a rule of life for your family will help you do just that. There's an incredible book that I am indebted to highly for this concept of crafting a rule of life, and it's called just that. It's by an author named Stephen Makia, and he wrote a book called Crafting a Rule of Life. And it goes through a way of developing a plan of how you'll get some of these spiritual practices accomplished and engaged in your own family life. And what he describes it as is very helpful, and it will help us build a framework. His definition of a rule of life is this. It says, your personal rule of life is a holistic description of the Spirit-empowered rhythms and relationships that create, redeem, sustain, and transform the life God invites you to humbly fulfill for Christ's glory. Now, there are a ton of things about that definition that resonate with me. The first is that he centers on rhythms and relationships. So not only are there rhythms, the way we inhabit our lives now. Everybody has a rule of life that they're living out, whether they have it written down somewhere or not. You have a way you do things, you have priorities, you have things that are important and urgent in your family already. Everyone lives with a rule of life, whether you know it or not. And so Stephen Makia honors that. He says, hey, there's a rule of life involves these rhythms. And it also involves relationships. Whoever you are listening to this, you have a network of very important relationships God has placed in your life. So those might be to your spouse. Maybe they're to your grandkids or your actual children. You have a series of relationships that really matter. And God wants to involve you in developing the spiritual life of those that you have the most influence over. So these rhythms and relationships aren't necessarily things that you need to create from scratch. There are all sorts of possibilities already built in to your life that you can notice and work some of these spiritual practices into. There's a translation of the Bible called The Message. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a very contemporary, phrase by phrase, idea by idea translation of the Scriptures. And there's a verse I want to read for you that talks about this exact concept, that the way that we build spiritual practices in our homes maybe are best started with these existing ways we already live our life. It comes from Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, and it might sound a little different read in this Message translation. It sounds like this. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you, take every day, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. I just love that because it gives a sense that this isn't some spiritual retreat away from your normal life to get some of these spiritual practices done. This is weaved in to your everyday, ordinary life. Your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life. I think that you will find, as you build this rule of life, pockets of time and space already worked into your day in and day out life where you can start to foster some of these spiritual practices. Now, when we think back to that definition, one thing I loved was this honoring, and that we just talked about these rhythms and relationships. But lastly, what I love about Stephen Makia's definition of what a rule of life is he says that they are these rhythms and relationships that God uses to create, redeem, sustain, and transform the life God invites you to humbly fulfill for Christ's glory. Now, what I love about that is it speaks to these important identities and roles Christ plays in our lives. He is a creator. He is a redeemer. He is a sustainer, and He is a transformer. So what I love about this is as you build your rule of life, which we'll do in a moment, is that you will find opportunities for maybe God needs to create something new. God can do that. From the very first pages of the Bible, we see God is a creator. Maybe God has you in a place where some things are going great and you just need to sustain them. That you have a rhythm built into your life that is working great. And God, through the power of His Spirit, will help sustain that. But maybe there are some things that are just out of whack. And you need God to come in and redeem and transform things. Maybe dinner time is a mess. Maybe it doesn't even happen. Maybe you're off in different places, and maybe once a week, once a month, you need to commit to all sitting down together. And God needs to just redeem that. Maybe you sit down every night for dinner together, but it doesn't go all that great. It's just kind of getting food down the gullet, and everybody goes off in their separate directions. Maybe God needs to just redeem and transform that time into something that you can feel great about. So, as we build your rule of life, in this next video that I'll put together for you, I want you to think through the rhythms and relationships that matter most to you. And as you look at those, what I want you to ask is, God, what do you need to create? What do you need to sustain? And what do you need to redeem and transform in our lives? We'll do that together in the next video as we build a rule of life together.